Shirel for helping to introduce and to moderate and to share the screen. It's really tremendously helpful and a pleasure. It's so nice to see everybody, whether you were here for last week's session or whether you're joining today. I'm continue to be Rabbi Avi Killip, and we are going to continue to study Midrashim from authored by Tamar Biala from the book Dirshuni. I'll do my quick show and tell one more time. The Midrash we're going to study today is from the first issue of Dirshuni. You can see it was a controversial discussion, I think, this book of modern Israeli Midrash, to decide whether to publish it looking like a sefer, looking like a rabbinic book of Midrash, or to publish it looking like a modern book. And they ended up with a really beautiful and sleek, but sort of modern book of Dirshuni. So we'll be learning again from this modern Israeli women's Midrash. And I would say if Midrash at its heart is an attempt to draw wisdom out of Torah, and the Midrash we're going to learn today, which picks up on the flood story, I think just shows such brilliance in terms of like thoughtful and close reading, to be able to draw wisdom out of a piece of the story that, I will be honest, I never otherwise would have paid attention to. And I feel like I've learned actually so much from this piece of Noah, this piece of Noah and the flood story, because of this Midrash that we're going to look at today. So I'll say again, just by quick, I'll spare the whole story of how these Midrashim came into existence, but just by quick summary, that I think of Tamar's Midrashim as one part Midrash, one part poetry, one part short story, and one part social commentary. And you will certainly see all of those parts come through in the Midrash we're learning today. I think the Midrash we're going to look at today leans hard into short story as a mode. So you'll get a feel for that. It's going to feel like a little bit of story time. But before we can get into story time, we are going to situate ourselves in the text. So we're going to start in the story of Noah and the ark and the flood. And we're going to read the verses around where she's going to place her story. And so that's where we're going to start. Before we share the screen, we'll share the screen in 1 second, and I'm going to ask for a reader to read that section for us. So you can think about it. If you're a reader, you can go ahead. You want to volunteer to read the first verses, you can go ahead and put up a virtual hand, so we'll be able to find you. These are the two questions I want you to listen for in these verses. And again, if I had my dream, I would actually put you in Chavruta and send you off to read these verses. Chavruta is one-on-one paired learning, and make you study them together. And these are the questions I'd give you, but we're going to do it all together today. So the questions are, how many days were they in the ark after the flood rain stopped? Okay, that's question number one. You're going to see the flood. The flood's going to stop. They're not going to get out of the ark immediately. Question number one you're listening for is, how many days do you think they stayed in the ark after the flood? And the second question is, can you tell me the trajectory of each bird? There are going to be two birds in the section that we're going to read. Can you follow the story enough? It is a very complicated and convoluted story. And I'll say, just by way of intro, that the Noah story is one of the most convoluted stories in the Torah. When you're looking to teach what people call the documentary hypothesis, which is the idea that the Torah is made up of multiple narratives that were edited together, Noah is the story that people go to say, look, this can't possibly be one story. You can pull it apart and find multiple stories here. It's a really convoluted and complicated story, and I feel in that way like it's a perfect text for this time, right? Because it is a complicated and convoluted time. So that's what we're gonna read first in the text. We're gonna pay attention to the birds and pay attention to the time and how they get out of the ark. Okay, so Shirel, if you want to share for us, we will start by taking a look. Always, this is truly what you should always do. If you are going to study a Midrash, you should always start by situating yourself in the verses about which your Midrash speaks. So you can scroll down a little bit so we can see this chapter here, chapter 8 of Genesis. And Bima or Bimia, do you want to read for us? Should I?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I meant to unmute you, but I muted you. I'll stay out of it.
Okay, there we go. All righty. Thank you. All right, so you'd just like me to start Genesis chapter 8 there.
Yeah, you can read us straight through these 5, and then we'll scroll. I think there's maybe one more verse down there.
Great. And God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end, 150 days, the waters decreased. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Is that Ararat or Arat? Ararat. Okay. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day, so I'll need you to scroll up. On the first day of the month were the tops of the mountains seen. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made and sent forth a raven, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. And he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off of the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him to the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. And he put forth his hand and took her, and brought her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came into him at eventide, and lo, in her mouth an olive leaf freshly plucked. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off of the earth. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and sent forth the dove, and she returned again. And she returned not again, unto him any more. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dried. And in the 2nd month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, the earth was dry. That is convoluted.
Thank you. Right. Such a simple, clear story. You got it now. We can move on. All right. Thank you so much. That was beautiful reading. If you are like me, it's like just hearing words of Torah wash over you is like in and of itself a rewarding and beautiful practice. But when we actually try to dive into what are they talking about here, right? You can throw into the chat. We'll just do answers into the chat. How long does it seem to you like they stayed in the ark after the flood ended? Let's see, we got one vote for 14 days. Who else? Anyone else willing to take the energy to actually look back? Centuries, right? It's several months, 54 days, 2.5 months, many months, 210 days, 47, right? So one thing that we have proved is it's not clear cut, right? And I think the answer is, I tend to think the answer is actually closer to hundreds of days than to a few days. But the answer is a long time, right? It is not the case that the rain stops and they go back outside. So one thing I'll just say, I've spent a lot of time, you know, back in like April, I think, or something of 2020, right? A long time ago, when we thought the pandemic was like a new and short thing. I actually like published an article about like that I think that they forward titled "Noah Knows How to Quarantine," right? Which is like, this is a story of quarantine. This is a story of like a disaster is happening outside and I want to stay inside. And the answer to the question of like, when do you get to go back outside is not so simple. right? And that is definitely something that we have discovered, right? The idea that there are like multiple points of false starts. Somebody on a listserv that I'm on recently said, Hadar published, in last spring, Hadar published a breathtaking series of classes called the Torah of Reopening. They said a breathtaking parentheses, if premature, series of classes called the Torah of Reopening. That last spring we said like, great, we're ready to reopen the world. And here we are, obviously, in January, back where we were in many cases, that it's not clear always, right? When the flood is over. That from our perspective, we could say the flood was over. Why didn't they leave the ark? But that when you are Noah and when you are in the ark, it is not always a clear-cut answer to be able to say, this flood is over. It's safe now. It's time to emerge. So what does Noah do? He devised these tests, and the tests are birds, right? He's going to send out birds on test flights. Why? Presumably he's sending out birds to see if the land if it's wet, or if it's, is water covering the earth still, or is there some land? What's he looking for from these birds? Okay, so tell me, at least a couple of people throw into the chat, like just a clearer description of the birds in plain language. There's two birds. What happens to each bird? What are the trajectories here? Right. Someone says the phrase canary in the coal mine, right? That concept is that a canary is, you would bring a canary with you into the coal mine. So if there's some sort of gas leak or something, when the canary dies, that's a sign for you. Or when the canary starts to sound an alarm, that's a sign for you, because the bird is going to notice the change first. This is like, right, he's using the canary as the example here. Okay, so first we send out the raven, and the raven never comes back. So the lesson Noah takes presumably from that is no go. He assumes that means the raven died. Then he sends out the dove, and the dove comes back with this branch, right? This famous image of the olive branch. And then the dove goes out again and doesn't come back, but this time he understands the not coming back in a different way, right? The first time the animal doesn't come back, it means no go, don't leave. The second time the bird doesn't come back, it means something different. So we are going to look at this Midrash that Tamar writes, and Tamar's Midrash is about the birds, the dove and the raven. Okay, and Tamar is going to ask the question, what happened to the dove and the raven, right? She is going to look at all of the Torah, right? She's going to look at this whole story, this amazing story about these characters and destruction and everything that happens in the flood story. And what Tamar sees that she picks up on is these two birds about whom I've never thought anything about, right? Until I started reading Tamar's Midrash. And here she's this incredibly sensitive reader. And I'll let us read the first paragraph. And then we're gonna go through her Midrash, and we'll sort of slowly let it unfold and see where it takes us and where she's gonna take us. Okay, so you can scroll all the way down till we can see her Midrash. Again, I would say same as last time, her Hebrew is beautiful and it's not particularly hard. So if you are a person who has access to Hebrew, this is a great text to try. And I also want to welcome you to like stay with us in English and then print it and read it in Hebrew after, maybe as a way to practice your Hebrew if that's something that you're into. But I'm going to ask for a reader in English. And again, I may jump over to the Hebrew a little bit here and there to share. And I am going, this time I actually put in section markers. I think for each paragraph, we'll pause after each paragraph to talk about it. But I would love for, how about Tybell, you want to read for us? This time I won't mute you, I'll let.
Yes, because since my religious name is Tybell, which is the Yiddish for dove, how could I not read?
Oh, beautiful. Yes, you have the perfect image here. All right, so start us off with this first section.
A question was asked in the Beit Midrash of the birds of the sky, the raven and the dove which Noah sent out from the window. Whatever became of them? After all, of the raven it is written, it went off, going off and returning, until the waters were dried up from upon the earth. but it doesn't say what became of him. As for the dove, it is written, so she returned to him into the ark, for there was water upon the face of all the earth. And later on, it is said that she returned to him again no more, and it doesn't say where she went or what became of her.
All right. We'll pause for a second. A question was asked in the Beit Midrash of the birds of the sky. You might laugh when you hear that sentence, right? What a funny image, an image of like the bird Beit Midrash, right? A Beit Midrash is a house of study, right? It's like, this is a house of study of birds. If in some ways you could start off this Midrash in this very cartoonish state of saying like, what does that even mean to imagine the birds sit around and have their own bird Beit Midrash? But I think that there's something really incredible, and I want to say feminist, about what Tamar does here, which is that first of all, she's finding characters to ask about and worry about and learn from that are not the usual main characters, right? So already there's like a decentering, or rather a centering of marginalized characters, being able to like see these birds who we might not otherwise think about and center them. And then I think what's feminist is like even going a step further than that, and to say, not only is she centering the birds are not only going to be the object of what we're discussing here, the birds are also the ones who get to do the discussing, right? So already I think of just this first line is maybe offering us an image of like, what's a feminist Beit Midrash? Maybe it's a Beit Midrash where you go through the text and look for the women characters, but it's also a Beit Midrash where the women are the ones in the Beit Midrash doing the looking, right? So here the birds get to be the subject, and the birds also actually get to be the students and the scholars, right? The birds are going to be all the characters in this story as well. And there's something really interesting and powerful about that. And what are the birds noticing? The birds are noticing that there are two of them, right? Both the dove and the raven seem to be lost in the end of this narrative, right? Noah uses these birds to get the data he needs, and then he moves on, right? The narrative moves on, the Torah moves on, and the birds are saying, wait, stop, focus in here. We can't move on yet. What happened to these birds? What became of them? We have to know, we want to know, where are they? So I want to sort of offer it as like, if you can accept the cartoonish piece and maybe hear it as poetic instead of cartoonish, then it allows you to like jump into this next place of like, what does it mean to actually have agency and look for your own characters? It makes me think, if you've ever heard of Rabbi B'nai Lappi, who is the founder of Sfara, which is a queer Beit Midrash, she talks about, what does it mean to look for queer characters and in the story? And then what she gives this image of like, if a donkey were reading Talmud, a donkey would look for stories about donkeys. And then a donkey would look for stories about people who carry loads, heavy loads, right? They'd start to be more nuanced. So this is like, birds look for stories of birds, but it's also like, as a feminist, she doesn't have to only find women characters. She can also find birds and make feminist Torah out of the story about birds and see what their trajectories are. Okay, so now we're going to get, this is where this Midrash, some of the Midrashim in the book Dirshuni look exactly like classical Midrashim. If I showed them to you and I did not tell you where they were from, I told you they were from Midrash Rabbah, you would not know, right? This is not one of those. This one sounds like a short story. And so let's hear the next piece of our story. Tevel, do you want to unmute again and read for us a little more?
They sent the high-flying eagle who can bear another bird on his wings to fetch them. The eagle flew away for a day and another, and then returned with the dove and her entire family. Since from the moment she found a home up until that very day, she had been birthing and caretaking, breeding a multitude of sons and daughters, but he did not return with the raven.
All right. So they sent the high-flying eagle. The eagle here, the nesher, is right? Again, now she's in the Beit Midrash of the bird. So she's looking for bird imagery. The eagle is the redeemer, right? We're taken out of Egypt on the wings of eagles. And so here that they sent out the redeemer bird again to bring these birds back. It was once pointed out to me that actually the wings of eagles are not a very safe place, right? When eagles carry their children, they carry them in their claws because you want them protected, but the wings of eagles is actually not how eagles carry things. That's actually a little precarious place to be. But they send out the eagle, and the eagle doesn't find the or the eagle does find, we'll start with the dove. The eagle brings back the dove. And what does the eagle discover? What has the dove been doing? From the moment she found a home until that very day, she had been birthing and caretaking and breeding a multitude of sons and daughters. What is this image, right? The dove is doing exactly what she was saved to do, right? She's repopulating, right? The animals who were brought onto the ark to repopulate the planet with their animals. And here the dove in her imagination is doing exactly what the dove is supposed to do, right? But there's something like very intense about it, right? It's not just like, he brought her and her family, aren't they cute? They have so many kids. It's like there's something sort of intense. She's been birthing and caretaking and breeding and multitude, the language here that you can feel that it's like there's something really intense here, right? And then he says, but he doesn't bring back the raven. So he did sort of half the job, although the second, right, where's the other? Someone's asking like Immaculate Conception, where's the other bird? Presumably the dove has some help with the breeding, but I don't know really enough about doves to answer that. Okay, let's see what's going to happen with the raven. So we have one answer, right? One quick answer. Where's the dove? We come back. She is doing her job. She is repopulating. She's raising babies. She's very busy. Again, you can't help but not hear the feminist female image here. Okay. Do you want to keep reading for us, Teva? You could keep going and do the next section, and maybe Shirel, you'll just scroll a teeny bit.
Sorry, it took a minute to get unmuted. They asked him, that raven, couldn't you find him? He said, I found him flying here and there at the ends of the earth, and he refused to come with me. He said, ever since the day that Noah sent me out, I haven't stood or rested. And if I didn't return to him, how can I return with you? I answered, Noah has long since died, and neither his children nor their children are still on the earth, and nobody is still waiting for you. He said, died and passed from the earth, and I didn't know? His head drooped earthward. Once he raised it, he concluded, I won't join all of you and won't stop flying until the Shekhinah tells me to, for the earth is defiled, and of the Shekhinah it is written that she dwells among the impure with their defilement.
All right, gets pretty intense here, right? The reason that the eagle does not have the raven is not because he couldn't find the raven, right? He found the raven, and when he finds the raven, one thing that seems to be clear is that no one's ever looked for the raven before now. Right? If you were in our session last week, it's a theme that we heard actually from Tamar with Miriam, right? That people sort of left her alone. They only went to check on her like when it was too late. So it's, we don't exactly know what made the birds notice now, but it seems like it's been a while, right? It's been a while, and they haven't really checked in on the raven, and now they are checking in on the raven. And where, what has the dove been doing? The dove's been repopulating, but what has the raven been doing? The raven has not stood or rested. The raven says, if I didn't go to Noah, how can I go to you? So the raven has just sort of been like flying around eternally. The raven flying back and forth image, it's not just that the raven flew away and didn't come back. It's that the raven has been flying since then. And when the eagle says, Noah's long since died, his children and his children aren't still on the earth. Nobody is waiting for you. The raven, he tells the raven, like, this crisis is over. The flood is over. The crisis is over. The story that you are playing in your mind is over. Like, generations have moved on since then. And on the one hand, it seems clear that the raven both like didn't understand that to be true. His head droops earthward, and then he sort of raises it and decides, like, nothing short of the Shekhinah, which is this like comforting female image of God, nothing short of the Shekhinah is going to allow me to be calm, because the earth is defiled, right? Tum'ah, like that tum'ah, defilement comes from death. Right? It's like the earth is covered in death, and everything that dwells there is defiled. So to some extent, it may be like a survivor's guilt is what we're seeing. The raven says, like, I can't be the one to go back, but also the raven is actually able. Well, I don't know if I would say able. The raven is trying to like actually hold. What does it mean for the whole world to be destroyed, right? What does it mean to say that all the animals were destroyed except for these animals? That the raven is like, this world is full of death now. And I can't go back to that world. And maybe I don't want to go back to that world. Maybe there's some survival's guilt that like, why am I alive when everybody's dead? The raven is certainly, experiencing some kind of trauma here. So I always think about like when in the story to call this to people's attention. And it's interesting because when I say Tamar's Midrashim are all part social commentary, right? When I say, like, I think that this is really also a Midrash about, I'm reading it now always with COVID valences, right? It was not written with COVID valences, it's pre-COVID. It's a post-Shoah story, right? This is a Holocaust, a reflection on how do different people react to the Holocaust, right? If you read the Holocaust as the Jewish people's version of the closest thing we know to the destruction on the level of the flood story, and this Midrash is going to give us different ways that people responded after the Holocaust. I don't know which camp you're in. Some people, when I say that, are like, oh my goodness, I didn't see that. And some people say, well, yes, obviously, Avi, that is apparent. How could you read it any other way? But she gives us in the raven and the dove here, and we'll see how she plays out these characters. But even in this first sense, she gives us two different responses to how different Holocaust survivors have responded, right? Some say, I've got to build, I've got to make. We've got to make a country, or like a Haredi approach of like, we've got to make babies, we've got to reproduce, we've got to repopulate the world, versus, rebuild versus nihilist versus, or I don't know if I would say nihilist as much as like traumatized. Like the raven is like the Shoah survivor who says, I can't get over this. I have a memory of a teacher in college who once told me that her best friend's parents were Holocaust survivors. And when she was growing up, she's, a generation older than me. So her best friend's parents were Holocaust survivors. Her friend came over for a sleepover, and her friend said, your parents are just like my parents, except for they don't wake up in the middle of the night screaming. Which is just like such a heartbreaking image, but also, just really brings to light. It's like there is a level of trauma that was experienced by Shoah survivors that you don't come back from, you don't heal. Nothing short of the Shekhinah is going to rest that trauma. And there are certain Shoah survivors that sort of have a disposition or had, for years, a disposition of like, I don't want to be brought back into community. Like, don't you see that the world is defiled and the world is screaming? And that is in this picture of the raven here. And so we'll read on and we'll see what happens. The birds are not satisfied to just let the raven be. So it's interesting way to read, like either as a descriptive of our communities and or of a prescriptive of we can't just write off the raven. You know, they could say like, well, we tried. We asked him if he wanted to come back. He said no. And that's not what they say. Okay, so read us this next section.
They voted and decided to go and find the Shekhinah and bring her the raven so that he may cease from his flight. The birds of the sky asked the luminaries, where is the place of the Shekhinah? And they didn't answer. They asked the beasts of the field and the fish of the sea, and they didn't answer. They asked the trees and the grasses, and even they did not know. At that time, when they were looking to one another and seeking answers from one another, they heard the Shekhinah calling to them, I am here among you, for you are preoccupied with Torah, and I am listening and growing with you. She revealed herself to them in the image of a very large stork.
Okay. They voted and decided. Gamru ve'amru is rabbinic Midrash language. Is sort of like they had a beit din. They made a ruling. And what they decided is that we can't just let the raven be out there. They don't say to the raven, you need to come back anyway. We can't find the Shekhinah. That's absurd, right? They say, if what the raven needs is nothing short of the Shekhinah, then that is what we need to get, right? It's like, go find God. When God tells me to come home, I'll come home. And what they say is, right, Shekhinah is the feminine aspect of God. They're told, go find the Shekhinah, and they say, yes, that's what we have to do. So they set out to find the Shekhinah, right? They set out looking for God. And where do they look for God? Probably in all the places that everybody looks for God. They turn to the sky. They ask the sun, the moon, and the stars, where is the Shekhinah? And they don't find the answer in the stars, right? It's everybody's personal ritual journey, right? When we look for God, where do we look for God? We start with like the big answers, you know, we yell at the stars, where are you, God? And it's also maybe the journey that we all have post-Shoah, right? Post the Holocaust, where we sort of want big answers, and we're going to look for these big answers in the big places, right? They turn to the beasts in the field and the fish in the sea. They turn to the trees and the grass. They're looking for answers in the world, in the natural world, sort of these like very traditional places that we go to find God, and they don't find God in those places. Where do they find God? It says, at that time when they were looking to one another and seeking answers from one another, they heard the Shekhinah calling to them, I am here among you, for you are preoccupied with Torah, and I am listening and growing with you. So there's two things here, right? Where do you find the Shekhinah? One answer is you find in the searching, right? This is like a verse, you know, in my search, it is in my search. I went out to seek you, and it is in my seeking that I found you, right? That's how we find God. In the search for God is where we find God, right? In our questions is where we find answers. That's a very Jewish approach and a Jewish understanding of how we find God. And it's in our yearning that that God is manifest, right? That we don't always have to get a clear answer. That's where the answer manifests. And the other is that she's calling on an image of chavruta learning, right? We have these texts in the Talmud that tell us where two study together, that's where the Shekhinah, when two study together and talk Torah, that's where the Shekhinah dwells, right? God shows up to chavruta learning. So if you ever find yourself, this is a great piece of practical advice you can take away from this class that you learned from Avi Killip on Tuesday afternoon. If you're ever in need of the Shekhinah, find someone to study Torah with you in Chavruta. And we are told, we learn in the Talmud, that anywhere that two people are learning together, you manifest Shekhinah. There the Shekhinah dwells. I wanted to put this on bumper stickers for Project Zug is Hadar's Chavruta learning platform, like guaranteed Shekhinah dwelling. If you take a Project Zoo class, because I really sort of personally deeply believe in it. But that's how they manifest Shekhinah here, right? Either in their search is where God is found, and or in their learning is where God is found. And God says, I'm here for you. What do you need? And the brilliance, this is really, truly brilliant, right? Again, if you can pause the image, the ability to see it as cartoonish and say, she's brilliant, actually, Tamar, because if you're taking Shekhinah, female God image, plus bird story equals a stork, right? The ultimate mother image. And if you look, this is where you have to look to the Hebrew. The word for stork in Hebrew is a chasidah, is like the word chesed, is found there. Chesed meaning loving kindness, right? The motherly image, and chesed as an image that we associate with Shekhinah. This is like the mother bird Shekhinah image comes to us as a stork. I don't actually know, maybe Shirel, you could answer this for us. I don't know how much in Israeli society, if there's like this, in American society, there's an image of like babies, storks bring babies to houses. Like the stork is the mother, is the bird of mothers. I don't know if that's an image from Hebrew and Israeli culture also, but certainly Hasidah as the name for a stork carries that image here. So would they actually manifest Shekhinah? And now we have to go and find the raven and see what happens. So I'll read the next section.
The eagle went and brought the raven, who was well on in years, his wings dry and gray, limping in flight. The dwellers of the Beit Midrash said to him, "Why do you fly back and forth and find no rest?" He said, "Where should I stand? And where should I rest my wings? Anywhere I try to stand, the dead eyes of my brothers and sisters are staring at me. And anywhere I try to sit, the earth stirs and groans, and the weeping voice of my brother's blood rises upward from it."
So I'll just pause there for 1 second, because it's a big piece to say. Somebody had put in the chat before that you heard echoes of Cain and Abel story of Cain v'Hevel, and here she makes it really explicit, right? The brother's blood is crying out to me. That we see that reference back to that story that the raven says, like, I can't rest. I have to fly back and forth.
They answered, but the dove found land on which grass grows, and took an olive branch in its mouth, and then went and blossomed and sought out a new life. And she is still giving birth even now. And it is written, the waters left firm ground upon the earth, and the earth is waiting for you and those like you for thousands of years now to come back. He answered them, even if the waters have left firm ground upon the earth, I cannot dwell on it, for it says, the face of the soil was charev, destroyed, and a place that has no face. Its tears cannot be wiped away, or its disgrace.
Okay, so she's making a play on words here on like pnei ha'adama, which actually works like in English also, right? The face of the earth, is to say, like, not only they were wiped off the face of the earth, but her play is like the face of the earth was destroyed. The earth is now faceless, and that means it can never be comforted. But there's something really powerful in this image that if you are a person who has ever experienced a trauma, you may have experienced this additional trauma, right? Of having somebody who is genuinely trying to help you say to you, well, why aren't you having the reaction that this other person's having? You know, I realize you're saying you don't want to come to work because your child is sick, your mother died, whatever the problem is, but like so-and-so had the same situation. She had the same surgery. She had the same trauma, and she's okay, or she's responding differently, or maybe even she's responding in the prescribed way that we told her to, which is like, keep having babies even now. Also, just the image of like the even now is like on the side of, while this is all happening, the dove is still like popping out more and more and more and more eggs are hatching still as the story progresses. But sort of the pain of knowing that the birds of the Beit Midrash are trying to do the right thing, and to hear them here say what we all know to be the wrong thing, right? Which is why isn't your trauma like their trauma? And the other thing I would want to point out also is the dwellers of the Beit Midrash is Yoshvei Beit Midrash is in the Hebrew, is Yoshev is to sit, right? Dwellers sounds like live, but the Yoshvei Beit Midrash is literally those who sit in the Beit Midrash, dwell in the Beit Midrash. Is the contrast of that image to the why do you fly back and forth with no rest, said those who sit. It's there's a fundamental mismatch between their sort of sitting and the ravens moving, where they're saying, why aren't you sitting? And the raven is how could I even talk to you? I can't even imagine sitting on the earth, and you are Yoshvei, you're sitting in this place that I'm telling you is defiled. And they aren't able to speak to each other here. They're not able to comfort, but I think also that's an intentional word choice and image. Okay, so we'll read the next section. I think it really starts to sink in here. You want to scroll down for us? Yeah.
I lost the top line. I remember it said, at that moment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
At that moment, the sun began to set, and the sky seemed to them as red as blood. The inhabitants of the Beit Midrash looked at the dove and saw that she was tired and weeping. They looked at the raven and saw that he was losing his mind. I'll
pause there for a second, right? This is so powerful. As the sun begins to set, right, after this whole story, this one little line, right? They looked at the dove and saw that she was tired and weeping. That we had been operating on a narrative up until now where we had two types of response to trauma, right? The healthy, productive, I'm fine, I'm having babies response, and the I'm traumatized, I can't cope response. And now when we get to this, as we near the end of this Midrash, we get to see that actually the dove's response to trauma is a different one than the raven's, but it is not fine, right? It's not that the dove is healthy and happy and taking care of all these babies. The dove is struggling also. The dove is tired and she's weeping. And turns out they've spent all this time conjuring the Shekhinah in order to take care of the raven, but actually the dove was in need of care also. And again, I don't think that this is meant to be the image of male and female, but I do think that obviously the dove is very much a mother image here. And the idea that sometimes mothers who are keeping it together, and the world is saying isn't it amazing how much she can do? And it's actually how much she's doing is hiding the fact that she's not okay. She's tired and she's weeping and she needs attention, but that's not seen because it seems you're a hero. I saw there was a video I saw someone put together, where a mom is I'm not okay. And they're you're a super mom. And she's no, really, I'm not. Really, I'm struggling. And they're well, you're awesome. It's we just can't hear that. And that's here also. And so it's so powerful and tragic, right? To get to the end of this Midrash and discover actually that the dove is tired and weeping and that the raven is losing his mind. It's actually both. They're both so in need. And so we'll see. We'll read that last paragraph or the next paragraph.
They looked to the Shekhinah and saw that she was spreading her wings, and they were large, and a warming wind arose from them. The Shekhinah arose from her place and went over to the dove and the raven and sheltered them with her wings. The raven ceased his flight. The dove's soul was rested.
All
and
right.
Some say
just to clarify here, nach nafshe, shel yonah, the dove's soul was rested, is a literal translation that I left you here, but actually nach nasha, your soul is rested in rabbinic texts means you died. So I think there are people who read this and say, no, I don't think he died. But like, if you're reading it in the Hebrew, you know that nach nasha, it's maybe like a rest in peace, right? If you say rest in peace, you know, that doesn't mean like have a good nap. That's what nach nasha means here in Hebrew. So in this moment, both of these birds finally find peace, and they find peace only in ultimate peace of dying here through the Shekhinah. And I want to say a couple things. I think if you were with us last week, then you might say, last week we read this heartbreaking Midrash about Miriam's death, and then I promised you an even sadder Midrash this week. I think this is maybe another way, another story, another version where Tamar is giving us, I promise that next week we'll look at a different one that won't have this, but another way of giving us a like death as a resolution of pain, that isn't a suicidal, it's not in praise of suicide, but it is, I think offering us a way to understand death as a piece, and also understanding that actually, like when you've lived through something like the destruction of the world or the Shoah, or the Holocaust, that it may be that actually that trauma never really leaves you. There is no peace until the ultimate peace. And so, which isn't to say that it has to be that way, but it is that way for these two birds. And I think that seems to be a piece that ends up being true for both of them. And then I think, so Tamar gives us, through the exploration of these birds, right? Whoever even noticed these verses in the Torah other than to say like, oh, an olive leaf, that's pretty. And she makes them into these like heart-wrenching stories that help us see the different possibilities of trajectories and responses to trauma. But yeah, I agree. It's not at all a suicide. Somebody put in the comment, right? Like this is, last week maybe was a suicide. We don't know, but this is definitely not a suicide story. It is a story of a peace and of helping them find peace. Okay, let's read this last paragraph, because I think the way she ends this is really significant and not, and maybe even the most important part of the whole Midrash.
And some say that at that moment, one could hear the murmuring of the Shekhinah, who was saying to those birds who dwelled in the Beit Midrash, what do we know about the dove and the raven? We are not doves or ravens, and it wasn't we who were sent out from that window to go and look.
So again, this I think is such a clear, we have in the voice of the Shekhinah, right? Which, let's remember, is a voice of God telling us, don't judge, essentially, is how I would translate it, right? What do we know about the dove and the raven? We are not doves or ravens, which on the narrow is this bird telling the other birds, like, don't, now that these two birds have died, right? We're so quick to turn around and say, like, well, this one responded well, or that one didn't respond well, or here's how you should respond to trauma in all these different moments, is to say, like, actually, if you didn't live through the trauma, you can't understand. And so it's not for you to say, right? It's not for us to say what this was like. And I think there is some as there is in so many classical midrashim, there is a little bit of self-reflectiveness also of Tamar saying, who am I to write this midrash? Right? Like, I wasn't there. I didn't go out and look, and it's not for me to write this midrash. And that the birds are having to remind us also in this story to say, again, like, we don't judge Holocaust survivors for how they responded after the Holocaust. That is not for us to do, because we were not there and we did not experience that trauma. I think that's in the specific read of this as a Holocaust narrative. And then I think more broadly, again, people are saying in the chat, it's like if I said, like, just reference our most recent trauma, you'd say, like, well, which of the most recent traumas should we reference? But to say like, right, is it healthy? Is it useful? Is it our place actually to sit there and say what was their response? No, I think Tamar would say no in this Midrash. Is it healthy? Is it our place to sit there and say, where are those people? Where did they end up? Let's keep asking where they are, right? Where the Midrash begins, of the birds of the Beit Midrash wondering where these birds are. And it's up to us to try to do what we can to manifest Shekhinah, to try to bring them back, even though that seems like a very high bar. Okay, I want to say this. Again, it's so hard. It's hard in a group this big. I would love to hear. I don't know. Maybe I'll just invite you to put into the chat, just for a lack of a different place to put it. But I think it would be helpful for everybody to just hear, like, what are your reflections on this Midrash? What are you taking away from it? And then I have one more exercise that I want us to do, but I think it's worth pausing. I just want to invite you to like put into the chat one reflection on what you're taking away. I think this Midrash can teach us about, what does it mean to rebuild? What does it mean to find God in destruction? What does it mean to try to heal, to cope with trauma? There's so many different elements of this. And we can just take a minute to see everyone's. Yeah, Bimi, I appreciate your sharing that. Optimism, pessimism, compassion. Everyone has a different perspective. The search is all, there are no answers. Yeah, there's so much here. And I think also we can add the extra sort of layer of stepping back out to say, what do we learn about feminist Midrash? Again, so, last week I said, what makes this Israeli? What makes this feminist? To say, like, is this Israeli because it's written in Hebrew in a way that could only be generated from an Israeli? Is it Israeli because it's commenting on like particular archetypes of how Israeli society has responded to the Shoah, or two different paths of how Israeli society has chosen to take to respond to the Shoah? I think all of that is wrapped up in this. In the last 5 minutes, here's what I want to do as an exercise. This is what I've developed as a way to teach this. I called it From the Flood to the Rainbow, right? Because we can't stay in the flood, and it's too sad, I think, to take people down into this Midrash, which just goes further and further down, and then down into the Shoah, further and further down into our own trauma, into the way that we have supported or not supported the people around us and their trauma. It's not fair to leave you here, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. You can't just go back into the rest of your day. And actually, the Torah doesn't expect us to, because the Torah ends with the flood. Ends the flood story with a rainbow. And I'll tell you, I learned a tremendous amount about the value of that rainbow when my eldest son, who's now 9, was, 3, he was little, and we got our first book from PJ Library of the Noah story. And on the last page of the story, it has the animals and the ark, because people love to make children's books about this horrifying story about the world being destroyed. And when you get to the last page there's a rainbow. And he was so delighted, like just this pure surprise, that he said, a rainbow. And in that moment, I realized that it is so not obvious that this story ends in a rainbow, right? And you only get that complete surprise once, right? Only the first time you read the story do you get to be actually truly surprised and delighted that this story ends in a rainbow. But the story doesn't end in the flood. The story ends in the rainbow. So just by way of, we're not even going to study it. I put a couple questions on the handout if you want to mull them over. We are just going to read it as by way of, is it at the bottom of the handout, or did I not include it? Yeah, there you go. Okay. We're just going to read it by way of climbing our way back out from this dark place, almost as a ritual. And then we will close. And then I think Sherelle has a few announcements that you can't go directly from what I'm teaching into. So we'll climb out with these words of Torah. Maybe 1/3 reader volunteer will take us out with the story of the rainbow and the covenant. Yeah, Stephanie, you want to read for us?
And God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, As for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the fowl, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood, neither shall any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the cloud, that I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bows shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, and that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth.
Thank you so much. I want to leave it at that, right? I want to leave it at the possibility that even our deepest trauma leads us into covenant and leads us back towards rainbows and promises for a future with less trauma and more healing. Thanks. Hand it back to you, Sherelle. If you're talking, we can't hear you though, so you gotta unmute.
I was thanking you, and I'm happy I had the extra pause because it is a difficult transition. But thank you for drawing wisdom with us and for us from the Torah, and hopefully manifesting some Shekhinah with many, many zugot here with us. So thank you very much for that. And just before we close off, I'll give you a quick rundown of what's coming up. Tomorrow, Wednesday, January 18th, the Torah of Music will have part 3, Singing Through the Sea, Lamenting at the River, song narratives in the Tanakh. On Thursday, January 20th, also part 3 of Praying Anew, Unlocking Meaning in the Words of the Siddur with Rabbi Eli Kaufner. On Thursday, Can We Separate Torah Artists from Their Art? And on Sunday, January 23rd, Speaking Up, The Audacity of Prayer with Rabbi Avi Killip. And on Tuesday next week, we're going to have part 3 with Rabbi Killip of Dirshuni. So once again, you're more than welcome to pop over to the OC-CSP website to see the list. And I know some of you asked about having the first session of this series, if it's on YouTube. I'm going to check all of that, and we'll make sure to send you an email with more information. And I'll just mention, Rabbi Killip, that the Hasidah in Israeli culture has mainly been adopted, through Disney and European tales, but in Ethiopian Jewish culture, the Hasidah is the bird that brings Ethiopian Jews to Jerusalem, and they have many psalms and poems about this bird.
Not the Neshet, the Hasidah.
The Hasidah, specifically in Jewish Ethiopian tradition. So,
yeah, amazing. Thank you so much.
So thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful remainder of the day. Hope we see rainbows. Bye.